Good morning again, everybody. Welcome to our wonderful workshop on IHSS issues and update. We have Karen Kiesler on the phone, the Executive Director of CAPA and a wonderful, wonderful advocate. Sitting beside me is Lauren Steinberg. Lauren is the Systems Change Advocate for the Independent Living Center in Berkeley. I'm really happy that she's here to join us. Karen, are you on the phone?
I am.
Boy, you are. Thank you, Karen.
Should I take it away?
Please take it away. Thank you.
Well, first I want to say that it's a great honor to be invited to speak, and I'm sorry that I'm not in the room, but want to tell you first and foremost that CAPA, the California Association of Public Authorities, that we very much value our partnership with SECA, and without that partnership, I don't think that budget results would be as not bad as they turned out to be. So I'm going to divide the outcome of the budget into two different topic areas. One is to talk about the money, and then the second is to talk about some policy issues. So the governor signed the budget bill. The legislature passed it on October 8th after a marathon all-night session where they started about 10 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, October 7th, and they adjourned Friday at 8:30 a.m. It was an incredibly long and drama-filled almost 24 hours of them being on the floor with the governor in the Capitol and there through the long night as well. For IHSS, the savings that are scored are $300 million, and let me put that in context of the challenge that the leadership and the legislature had was to resolve a $19 billion budget deficit, and that's out of a budget that's a little less than $90 billion. So $300 million in savings that were scored for IHSS. The decision that was made by the Big Five, and the Big Five are the governor, the Assembly Speaker, the Senate President Pro Tem, and the minority leaders for both the Assembly and the Senate. The decision that they made was to make decisions for the IHSS budget for both the current fiscal year, 10-11, and for the upcoming fiscal year, 11-12. So they've scored $300 million in savings for both years. That's a combined $600 million. The first piece is that we will be seeking approval from the federal government for a new provider fee, and the budget assumes that we'll bring in $190 million in both 10-11 and the 11-12 year. The provider fee will really not affect providers other than that they will get one extra check a year that will show that there is a deduction of sales tax for the full amount of pay that they have over a complete calendar year or fiscal year. Then it will also show that they've been repaid for that sales tax deduction, and the check will be zero. This provider fee will not start until we get federal approval, but the budget did assume that the federal government will be generous and will allow for this to be implemented back retroactively. And so again, there is no negative impact at all on providers, but it's a very clever gimmick, if you want to say, to secure extra money from the federal government. The second piece is that they assume $75 million in savings from caseload, and it's very interesting. Many of us have been tracking IHSS caseload for years, and it normally grows at between 6 and 7%. Sometimes caseload has grown by as much as 11%. Sometimes it's been small, like 2%. But for many, many years, there's been a constant growth in the number of cases and the number of hours for the IHSS program. This year, actually, we have the reverse of that. We have fewer people in the IHSS program now than we did a year ago, and there's a lot of theories about why that might be the case. Many people think that it's a consequence of the anti-fraud initiative that the governor was successful in getting the legislature to pass last year. There may be other reasons for it, including social workers. Many social workers have lost their jobs as a consequence of the county cuts. We don't know exactly why, but I was very happy that the budget assumed $75 million in caseload savings by rebenching to the more accurate level of where we really are on number of IHSS cases. Then the third piece, and I described this yesterday on a different conference call as the turd in the punch bowl, is the cut, the actual real cut. And this is $35 million assumed in savings by enacting a 3.6% across the board cut to authorized consumer hours. And that word authorized is important because there's very often a difference between what the social worker authorizes and what a consumer actually uses, which are the paid hours. So this is off of authorized hours, and if a consumer has a notice of action that shows that there's unmet need where they are at the cap and can't get that more hours than what the statute allows, then it's still a cut off of the authorized hours and comes out of that unmet need. There are no carve-outs and there are no exceptions, and there definitely was discussion within the legislative leadership about whether there should be some effort to identify consumers who are the most likely at risk to be institutionalized due to this 3.6% cut, and there's pros and cons. If they had adopted carve-outs, it's possible that the people who would have been in that class of not getting cut would have made the other group of people getting cut so much, their cut would have been so much bigger that it could have been, instead of a 3.6% cut, they could have had a 7, 10, or 15% cut, depending on how many people got carved out. So the decision was that there's no carve-outs, no exceptions. Consumers do retain the same rights to appeal and have the same appeal process that they do right now, which is to say that you can't appeal saying, I don't want this 3.6% cut, but you can appeal saying that you don't think that the assessment from the social worker is accurate, or the reassessment. So the way that this will happen is that the statute says the cut takes effect 90 days after the governor signs the bill, and he just signed the bill on Tuesday. 90 days, according to my calculation, is somewhere around January 17th or January 18th. Usually the state implements cuts on the 1st or the 15th of the month, so I expect that this 3.6% cut will take effect on February 1st. The consumers will all get a notice of action that shows the hours that they have been authorized by their social worker, and then that there's an automatic 3.6% deduction, and then the net amount of hours that their worker can get paid. Very importantly, there is new language to reinforce consumer rights to use their IHSS time for any IHSS authorized task. And let me explain just a little bit about that. I have forever believed that the IHSS, when a consumer gets the notice of action and it shows a breakdown of how much time for meal preparation or for laundry or for bowel and bladder or whatever, that the consumer has flexibility to use the time interchangeably between the tasks, so long as they do not exceed and cannot exceed the total amount of hours authorized by the social worker. Now, on the other side, there are some people that work for the state and some people who work in counties who believe that when you get that notice of action, when it says 7 hours for meal prep, that you can't use time from a different task to go to 8 hours for meal prep, for example. This is a really important point, is that the statute reinforces the consumer's right to use their time flexibly and interchangeably between all of the authorized tasks all up to the cap. And I want to say something here about how our speaker and our president pro tem approached negotiations with the governor and with the Republicans was that they, I think unlike last year, they really had a principle of trying to maintain consumer choice and maintain consumer rights or enhance them wherever possible. So what I've just described, I think, is very, very important. Now, this links to the lawsuits from last year, and as you might recall, last year the legislature agreed with the governor in February of 2009 to reduce state financial participation in worker wages. And then later in July, they agreed to legislation demanded by the governor to cut out consumers who have a functional index score below a 2. There's litigation on both of those cuts that were approved last year, and the state has lost. They have been enjoined and prevented from implementing those twin reductions. What the legislature did here was to say that they know those cases are on appeal and that the governor and the administration are still trying to convince judges that they have the right to implement those cuts. So those two lawsuits will continue, but they said in statute that if the administration prevails, that they are unable to implement those cuts until July 1, 2012. And that's the day before that, June 30th, 2012, is when the 3.6% cut is suspended or taken out of statute. That prevents the administration from double dipping, from having both the savings and consumers hurt by a 3.6% cut in hours, and then the worst scenario, which would have been to have both the 3.6% cut and a cut in state money for worker wages and a state cut that eliminated the consumers below a 2.0. So they cannot double dip. I'm going to stop right there and see if there's questions on the money, on the savings tied to caseload, savings tied to provider fee, and the cut of the 3.6, and then I can move on to some of the policy issues that were addressed by the legislature on disqualifying crimes and so forth.
So are there any questions for Karen?
Yeah, excuse me.
Microphone one at a time, please.
Okay, I'm trying to figure this out with the regards to the 2.0 index score, functionality index score. So what you're saying is if the courts prevail, or the state prevails and they get that, then what happens with the 3.6%? Does that go back into effect, or?
The 3.6% cut stays in effect until June 30th, 2012.
2012, okay.
And then that 3.6% cut is no longer in statute unless a future legislature makes a change. But right now, that 3.6% cut will no longer be in effect on June 30th. And then following your question of if the state is successful on the lawsuit to eliminate people based on a functional index score below a 2, if they prevail on that and win in court, they cannot implement that until July 1st, 2012.
Oh, I see. Okay, great. Thank you.
I was wanting you to review the provider fee again.
Okay, the provider fee. I have to give great credit to SEIU. They did a lot of work with a consulting firm that's called Sellers Dorsey, and Sellers Dorsey is a firm that has tremendous respect around the nation in working with the federal government to assist states and sometimes local government in securing additional federal money. So Sellers Dorsey came into the budget process and they had a number of meetings with state officials and also with IHSS stakeholders. They had an idea that has been successfully used in a couple of other states